Thank you to Meadow. What amazing vision Meadowlands was. So thanks for the opportunity to be here. And thank you to all of you. Want to just really quickly do something that, growing up here, it's important to realize this place, there were people here long before our civilization and culture came here. And so as you wander around and get to know this place, do think of how long humanity has been here and of the history that got us to the place we are today. It's not necessarily a pretty history. Important to hold that with you, honor and reflect on it. Precisely. What am I most excited about right now? I'm most excited about cooperative cannabis. I'm most excited about the fact that we're less concerned about conspiracy charges than we used to be, so we can talk openly to each other about what we do. And I think the ability to work together is the most powerful thing that we have, and the ability to talk openly about those things, to be here like this. I mean, this was unthinkable growing up as a grower in a community, one of the more productive tiny slices of California. California supplies 70% of the nation. The 10 square miles I grew up in probably supplies 20% of it. So very secretive, not able to talk about big vision, not able to share your dreams, aspirations, your insecurities, your fears, anxieties. Being able to do all of that now is going to empower us to work together and to cooperate in ways that we haven't been able to before. So cooperative cannabis is really what I'm the most excited about.
I think for me and really any branded product maker or manufacturer, it's I guess it's twofold. There's us being forced to scale to large amounts that we weren't really anticipating we'd have to before. But at the same time, if we succeed, we're capturing this market share that we just didn't really think was attainable before. So it's scary, it's risky, but I think that's been the course of cannabis since the beginning. Very scary and risky and taking these risks. But now we're just taking a different risk, and it's exciting. It's scary. But it's very exciting.
Good morning, and also thank you very much for having me here. I would say that the number one thing that excites our organization, myself as well, is the opportunity. Touching on what the senator said, it's the opportunity that everybody here has to create the industry as they should be created. There's been thousands of industries created before this, and now we have all of the technology at our disposal. We have the social understanding to create it in the correct way and make sure that the precedent that we set now is one that we can be proud of in 10 years, 50 years, 100 years. So there's not really any excuse for us not to create this industry correctly this time. We have everything at hand to do it right. And just looking at the capital side of things, we have many of the people who've been here for 10, 15, 20 years that allowed us to become what we are today. They still have an opportunity to be a part of the industry in the long term. And it's up to everybody here to make sure that that happens and that it happens correctly. So I would say that's what excites me the most in the big picture for the cannabis industry.
Good morning. I wanted to, well, for one, thank you very much for putting on this event. Meadowlands is amazing. My first camp out I've ever been to. This is epic. And kind of touching on, I'm every day more. Since the last few months, I've had more optimism and excitement about the future. I think it's been a really difficult beginning of the year, first 6 months for most of us. I think everybody in their own license type, coming online, 80% of your business that you used to work with is now gone. The market is now flooded because everybody stocked up on millions of dollars of inventory before the end of the year, and really put a lot of unexpected hindrances on I think everybody trying to go through the process. I feel like dust is starting to settle a little bit, and kind of from the testing angle of it, kind of looking at the data and analytics and the statistics of what we're seeing. I have more and more hope and optimism about by the day, and especially around the idea of cooperative cannabis. Because the resilience that I think a farmer has that's been doing this generationally and knows how to kind of tai chi and combat all the preventative kind of needs of the plant, and being a very integrity-based steward of this plant, it's no joke, and I think kind of being able to navigate not having to use all these Dow and DuPont Syngenta pesticides, and knowing how to combat all the different things that come your way, and being able to grow fire in areas of the state that are pristine microbiome environments that aren't like legacy ag lands, I think is one of the levels of resilience, and that's going to really kind of promote the most success for everybody going forward. I think from what we're seeing, in so many ways, a lot of the biggest licensed grows and kind of areas of the state where the kind of mega grows are happening are in these really legacy conventional ag zones, and now that we're doing kind of 66 pesticide tests with the most common kind of California ag pesticides, it's pretty gnarly and horrifying to see how much unavoidable residual environmental contamination is a reality that people have to deal with in certain regions. And so, I think although, a lot of my mentors and teachers and friends and community up in Northern California has had this really existential fear of what's to come, and, the corporate cannabis is going to come take over. But, honestly, kind of I see kind of, from just the testing side of it, I mean, it's not a plant you can just monocrop and kind of corporatize and kind of commoditize, because we're in an ag state and it's dirty land, and cannabis is like almost like this magnifying glass that through the regulations are kind of exposing a lot of the dirty legacy history of the green revolution and chemical industry. And so I think kind of staying clean, staying motivated and on point, keeping the interconnected web of community and cooperation within the kind of culture, I think is going to define and explode the craft industry and the small farm community and the valuation of clean trim and material in a world where there's a realization happening that everything's dirty.
Wow, that was this is a great panel. I love to hear how we're talking about each kind of segment of our supply chain and what the really good aspects are as we build towards a complete supply chain, because each one of us holds a really big piece. And without everyone really specializing in what they do well and really bringing that to market, we can really just get caught up in having one big mono kind of culture of agribusiness just take over. So it's good that we are passing along our history, passing along our culture, and making sure that doesn't disappear, because sometimes the culture and sometimes agriculture, it disappears on how we got here. And I want to make sure that just because people say I'm from Los Angeles, I've lived in Northern California my entire life. I'm a 17-year cultivator here in Northern California, and I'm trying to connect the dots between Northern California growers and where a lot of the commerce happens in cannabis in Southern California. So don't do anything wrong in thinking this is just a Southern California draw. I want to make sure that Humboldt and Mendocino and the Emerald Triangle is a brand for the entire nation and as well as internationally. We have a good opportunity to make sure that this culture is the foundation for growth for the rest of the world, so that they can emulate what we have kind of fought for, what we risked for, and look at some of the laws that we have now, because we're building them. We get an opportunity, and the reason why I'm so excited is this is the first time a senator has called me and said, "What can I do for cannabis?" They don't do that. So this is our opportunity now to push this envelope. Advocacy has been a big part of where our foundation was, but we really need to work into how are we going to regulate ourselves? Because if we don't regulate ourselves, they will regulate us in a way that we may not want or need. They don't understand. So you have to call your congressman. I mean, this sounds like the constant write a letter to your congressman, but it truly does make a difference. I mean, I've been helping Kevin De Leon kind of with his campaign, because he truly does believe in jobs and that cannabis has no harmful effects. That is the first line that we have to get to as politicians, is there's nothing harmful here. No one's dying from this. We're regulating a plant that doesn't hurt anyone. I think bleach kills more people than this, and we don't put any safety labels on that. So, I mean, this has really become to a point where we have to know that it's not harmful. They're understanding now, and having politicians come here and make sure that there's a platform for cannabis from every single politician that tries to run in California needs to be our goal. They need to make a stance and say, I'm with cannabis from here on out. There's nothing harmful about this. Regulations can be really tough right now because the pendulum is swung way away from no regulations to too much. We'll find an equilibrium if everyone's voice says, this is what's going to harm my business. This is what's going to make my business better. They need to hear from you. And so voting is going to be a big part of this, but holding your elected officials accountable for what their stance is and what they're going to do in the future, because there will never be a candidate who will come through California again, if we do this right, who doesn't make their stance on cannabis be positive. And we have to do that as a group. And with the leaders here and the leadership we have now, who is all focused on this, I mean, you're seeing this in Forbes magazine, AARP, everyone is writing about what cannabis is doing for California's economy. We need to make sure the politicians allow us to thrive in this economy and not put us into a place where you have to decide between your permit or surviving as a business. Those are two rock and a hard place. We can't be in that position too much. We have to tell them what is going to help us grow this economy right now. So that's what I'm excited about. They are listening. And if we don't keep telling them what we want, they're going to listen to someone else with more money. So we either have a large voice or we have a lot of money. I realize right now we have a large voice. So let's use the voice. It's cheaper. Thank you.
Awesome. Thanks, Jared. Thanks, all of you. Great answers. Great answers. Okay, here's something I want each of you to answer as well, and we can start wherever you want. What do you see as the biggest hurdle right now for our harmonious supply chain to overcome right now? Like there's a lot of fractured activity going on right now in the supply chain. We have a July 1 deadline looming. We're going to get into that a little bit more later. But what do you see as like the one biggest hurdle and challenge that our supply chain needs to overcome to become, completely harmonious?
Communication with everyone else in the supply chain. Don't isolate yourself saying, I'm only a cultivator. This is a product that has to make it to market. And so there are so many people in the supply chain that you need to communicate with. It's going to be important that you understand that because you have a product doesn't mean it gets to make it to market unless you market it well, you communicate well, that we all communicate about what is going to be the best way to get your product to the end user. And so all of these people sitting in this panel have a portion of the supply chain. You should know everyone here. You should communicate about how can I take my group who's a cultivator and make good connections with lab testing. Because if we allow all the agribusinesses to buy up 50,000 tests ahead of time, then we're 3 months behind getting our tests done. So we can't allow them to do it. We need to use our voice and we need to communicate with each level of the supply chain so that they know you're here, that they know that they need to take care of your testing as much as anyone else's, and don't let too much big business jump in the middle of every portion of the supply chain so they can tap into it. We can lower each other's costs if we don't get too greedy. And that's truly what we need. It's like you don't think that you're the only part of the supply chain that's important. Every single one of these is very important. Be humble. And I think being humble in your position and letting everyone else kind of help support each other is really the way that we can make the supply chain work. But we can't just let it fragment by saying, I'm an island, I'm a cultivator, take care of me. It's like I have to communicate to every person in this. And I'm here to make sure that Southern California makes sure that this brand of Humboldt cultivators makes it to the international market.
Thank you. Amen.
Hindrance kind of, I think, in supply chain. I mean, I think this year so far, with compliance testing kind of coming online, and kind of working with kind of the initial, operators essentially that bought into compliance testing, groups like Pacific Expeditors, Rise, early on kind of from doing testing, we started kind of almost like a canary in the coal mine, start to, through the testing process, realize things that work and what don't work. I think there's still a lot of work to go through to, make sure like all the little ins and outs of what it is for compliance testing and where compliance tested cannabis can be distributed to. I think there's a few things that still need to be worked out to kind of create the harmony kind of in the supply chain. But as far as the biggest issue, in my opinion, I mean, so many people that are kind of having these projections to make all these cartridges or all these products, kind of are kind of relying on a continuous source of clean material. And, the further off in the supply chain you are from the person that grew the cannabis, the more of a, incredible variability or exponential risk that person sprayed. And you don't know where it's from. Oh, it's from like some Santa Barbara farm that's, getting oversprayed by helicopters next door. And so kind of, the integrity of the system, I think, is only, I think in so many ways, the regulations, as stringent and difficult as they are, I think they're going to also be the biggest things that help define and value the quality of true, clean, quality cannabis. And I think, with, kind of the I think in so many ways it's going to really like progress the slow food movement ideals of, knowing and having a relationship with where you're sourcing your food, because, and especially with, manufacturing, there's, every license type has, the minimum, should be doing the minimum but most effective enough types of like R&D, kind of, different tests to help ensure that by the time they have a batch that's ready to go to a distributor for compliance testing, that that there's not going to be surprises, or there's not like huge amounts of pesticides. And so for most license types, you can do a lot to kind of minimize the vulnerability that you are exposed to, and with potential contamination risks or cross contamination. But with manufacturing, I think it's that's going to be one of the most difficult licenses to maintain and hold, because you're concentrating biomass from different parts of the state and environment, and working within closed loop systems where you're recycling and recirculating gases and solvents, and the trichromes with the pesticide just stick to the inside surface areas of the machines and they get in the gas. And the risk exposed to a person doing manufacturing or making cartridges or distillate, and how much. It's kind of one of the most revealing things, because through the concentrate it all comes out. And it's not uncommon for us to see in distillate 15 to 19 category 1 and 2 pesticides, in multiple part per million concentrations. So I think kind of that's the perfect example of like no supply chain management and understanding of the sources and the risks that they're exposing into their machine. Because once it's in, it's almost like the STDs, because it then ends up spreading around and can further kind of really bring a lot of kind of difficulties into everybody in your chain's reality. So yeah, just slow food movement, knowing your farm, where you're getting your material, like one off, like not 5 off. If you're relying on brokers to bring you pounds from all these different people, that type of thing's done, especially if you're doing extraction. But anyway.
I would like to echo what's been said about communication. As a brander and a person that makes branded products, we're taking a material and turning it into something that the masses want. And really, we encounter a lot of cultivators. I want to put my flower in this jar and I want to sell it. That might not be the best way to go. Maybe we have to turn it into something else that the people are asking for. So I think being humble enough to understand that we need to sell all this shit. We need to move this product. Is more the mindset that we need to go into, instead of I want to do this big grand idea. Like really get down to brass tacks and understand what we want to do is move product, and we're going to have to figure out innovative ways to get that done. So you might go into it thinking, oh, I want to make this vape pen, I want to do this, I want to do cartridges. That might not be the best way to go. So yeah, just communication, listening to the people that are on the front lines, the people that are doing the demos, the people that are interacting with the customers, the people that are in the dispensaries making the sales, getting that feedback and really pushing it through the whole supply chain, going to the cultivators, going to the the concentrate makers and the manufacturers, and saying, well, people want this kind of stuff, people want this kind of stuff, and really processing all that information so that we can sell everything.
I think undeniably the biggest barrier is at the local level. Most of California is still living under prohibition. 77% of California's growers can't obtain a permit. 75% of the most populated 100 cities aren't issuing retail permits. More sales are taking place in the unregulated market every day. Less sales are taking place in the regulated market, and it's because California cities and counties are failing. I have no concerns about us going global. We've run this market for decades, generations, and we're going to keep doing that. We got the global market. Don't stress. It's at the local level that we have problems. And we've got to do a lot more work there. I think that communicating with each other and within the supply chain is key, but communicating with folks outside of the cannabis industry is also very key. And like our ability to just be now, right? Like we used to be able to just be and drink some wine and it was no big deal. Now we can just be us like we've always wanted to. Be that and be proud of that and get out there and be that with everybody, even people who aren't there yet, because that's what's going to win at the local level. Making tremendous progress at the local level, thankfully, but California will not legalize cannabis for another decade. That's just what it is. We've got 10 years of hard work to do before every Californian can enjoy what we're all so happy about. Most of the people that started this journey aren't in yet. And that's a problem. We've got a lot more work to do. The second thing that I just want to point to as more of an internal housekeeping sort of a piece is the infighting. I'm just going to use a recent example. We've got a bill that would let small growers sell cannabis at 4 events per year. We went to the mat with other industry players talking about nonsense. It wasn't even what was in the bill. We brought support from local government. We brought neutrality from law enforcement. We brought support from labor organizations. We've been working this bill for 3 years because we know that these types of direct relationships with consumers are not only the norm, they're also a critical lifeline. And we're still fighting with each other over it. It's a bit frustrating. I also want to say that our community is diverse, beautiful, and brilliant. And it's in that multifaceted brilliance that I find what I need to be a healthy, whole human. It's all of us. It's all the differences. Differences can be challenging to manage. Differences are a real challenge, and we have to very intentionally manage our differences. And I would like to encourage that we organize not around our differences, but we organize around our similarities. Let's organize in a way that we come to a table to talk about our differences, not so that we set different tables for different groups. We really, really, really need to get to a point of togetherness so that we can take this on. So those are the two biggest barriers. Externally, it's at the local level, and it's with everybody. And internally, it's with our ability to come together and talk rather than talking in separate corners.
Excellent. Thank you.
I'll shift gears for a little bit. I, as a distributor, have a different lens, more on an operational and logistics side. So that's kind of where I end up staring often. But for us, it's probably transparency, as was mentioned before, and then making sure that there's a universal language for us to communicate in. The biggest thing, if you want to have close communication and transparency, is you need to speak the same language. And what that means is creating universal standards for us to move throughout the supply chain to help understand how we're moving. Everybody in this auditorium or this amphitheater knows how many bottles are in a case of wine, but how many eights are in a case?
Well, there's 8 in an ounce, and there's 16 in a case, and there's 10 pounds in a box, and there's 100 boxes in a pallet. Sorry.
Yeah. So,
Same size jar.
yeah. So in the regulated market. So the point there is just we need to start standardizing our operation if we're going to get to a place where we're able to compete with the real money, which has not shown up yet. We need to have the ability to speak the same language, how to move product the same way every time, that the retailers know exactly what they're going to get. The manufacturers are creating exactly what needs to be created, and the distributors are moving exactly what needs to be moved. And if we want to have any opportunity to compete with serious money that will come along in the near future, then you either need to have a lot of money, or a loud voice, or a lot of organization. And a lot of organization is what we can start with, because that just compounds the ability to speak well to the people. And so the best way that I can see us overcoming many of the obstacles, particularly for the small farmers or those that have been there for a very long time, is to create efficiencies in operation and ensure that we can get to market in a way that can't be outdone or done better than by those who have lots of money and lots of experience in the supply chain. So when Amazon shows up or any of these other big pharmas show up and they've got their supply chain dialed, and we do not, it's a very short conversation. So that would be the points I address.
Excellent. Thank you. Dropping knowledge up here. This is an all-star panel. Thank you guys for just rocking it out. Okay, I'm just going to kind of throw this out. Whoever has some answers, feel free to grab the mic. So there's predictions of both an oversupply of cannabis, market prices just plummeting like Oregon we're seeing up there now. There's also predictions of just a supply chain bottleneck stoppage. Essentially, no legal product is going to be able to make it to the market. Which is it? Is it a combination of both? How do you see it in playing out over these coming months, the rest of this year into next year? And what can we do to address it and get out ahead of it to try to fix it before it does become an issue? Whether it's oversupply, undersupply, combination of both. What do you guys think? What's the answer here?
The market needs to acknowledge the added cost of bringing goods to market. There's not a shortage of regulated supply. There's a shortage of cheap regulated supply, especially, the manufacturing segment has relied on low value biomatter for the out of state markets for a long time. That was in effect a market subsidy. And so there's going to be some very real price corrections that come into calculation when we actually figure cost of goods to market. Not having product that looks the way you want it to, that is the price that it always was in the unregulated market, is not the same as a shortage. Right now we have less than 1,000 retailers. We've got 1,700 licensed cultivators, many of whom are growing many, many licenses. There is plenty of regulated product for the regulated retailers. As we scale the retail segment, we are going to need to scale production. We can do that one of two ways: more growers or bigger growers. Obviously, we know what my preference is. Let's cooperate and make this cooperative cannabis thing the front runner and bring more folks in. But there is no shortage. There are products in the market that folks want to put on shelves at certain price points that aren't going to be feasible anymore, but that's not the same as a shortage, and that needs to be acknowledged. The basic truth is that we grow way more product than we will ever be able to consume as a state. And our challenge is getting as many of those hardworking humans that have pioneered this marketplace into the regulated market so they can stop worrying about their parents getting arrested, their children going to foster care, their doors getting kicked down. That's what we need to do as a regulated market. And we're perfectly situated to do that.
Anyone else want to weigh in?
Yeah, I'd love to. We SC Laboratories last year we opened. We're opening a lab up in Oregon. We've been open since last August, but all last year, essentially, we were going through the process of going through the accreditation process through this group called the Oregon Laboratory Assessment Program. And through that process, we basically were standing by and witnessing kind of the reality of what happened in Oregon, and it's pretty horrifying, because so much overproduction happened. So, people sitting on thousands of pounds, selling quarter pounds at a time, a couple pounds here and there to dispensaries. It's like no more 100 packs, and everybody grew 10 times or 100 times more than they've ever grown. And in cannabis, terpenes are the biggest spoilage. Cannabis can become a spoiled good. And quality, and the major metric of quality is terpene content, because it shows how well something was grown and cured and preserved, and it's exponential loss, from terpenes, from exposure to kind of temperature and, all these other things. And so, sitting on 1,000 pounds of weed that's going bad, and all the terpenes are going, so it can become like hot dog kind of distillate, at some point, because there can be nothing else done with it, isn't like the move, and I think people kind of, scaling as you're able to sell and have a market for, I think is going to be one of the big succeeding factors. But I also think California is a very different market than Oregon. There's like 4 million people in the entire state of Oregon, and everybody's growing like 60, 80,000 square feet, and And so, I mean, it's way too much. I mean, I think Oregon, whenever it's participating on a national market, it will, very well, a lot of the family farms will be competing with California, family farms kind of on that level. But, kind of right now, they're just trying to hang on for dear life and just be able to cover their overhead and their, kind of labor costs and all this stuff just to make it through, the next few years while, the market's just being decimated. So I think in California, I mean, it's such a huge state. There's such huge consumption, But again, it's like how much of the cannabis has gone to the East Coast, kind of over the last like 20, 30 years, of the percent of what's grown here. And so I think, thinking in terms of like, no more 100 packs, I mean, and just like understanding that you're only going to be able to sell as much as you grow, or you're only going to grow as much as you sell, and, it can go bad. But, as far as kind of, I think, two things. One, I think there's almost going to be a natural, like, the cannabis plant almost through regulations is going to have this natural governing mechanism of like capping off how big people can go. Because, like I was alluding to before, some of the biggest farms that, even when they're working so hard in their integrated pest management, like, biological control, all the things, even if they're able to grow their 1 million square feet of production without pesticides, they're always coming in just below levels of pesticides that are going to fail them if you concentrate that material, for these different category 1, category 2 pesticides. So it's like, I think, bigger is better. I mean, most of the big mega grows that we're seeing are in these certain legacy ag areas. And so it's like, it's going to be really difficult for them just on their own, if they even never use pesticides, to just be able to get product on the market. And so I think, that aspect is going to have a huge effect in kind of capping people's ability to just try to grow way too much. And, because certain amounts of it's going to have to go into distillate. Certain people are then taking the distillate and with pesticides, and then they're working with edible makers or infused product makers to dilute it out across batches so it can then pass, which is kind of crazy in its own. But, I think there's, different geographical regions of the state are going to have, different kind of issues with the, kind of oversupply and what can be done with that product, if it can even be made into like, inhalable extract or anything like that. But then lastly, sorry, I'm kind of just rambling on. The last thing I want to point on is the bottleneck in so many ways. Yeah, I mean, testing for, there's I think like 28 temporary lab licenses. I don't know how many are even being fulfilled yet. I think 19 maybe, but it's like, I mean, it's the state's put incredible accreditation and regulations on the lab. And I think that's one of the most important things to secure the integrity of the supply chain and the regulations, have all labs be able to be on account, ongoing proficiency testing, high levels of regulation or accreditation, on every test you run. I think it's going to, basically bring, all labs to account. But in the process, I don't know how, over these coming months, as like all of a sudden now there's a lot more demand for compliance testing. I think over, 6-month period, there very well might be kind of, a backlog essentially, of testing, and so, back to kind of the point I think, that was brought up earlier, it's communication. The more communication and effective kind of projecting that you can do with working with the lab to let them know what your expectations are on how many compliance batches you seek to do in a given week or month, how many R&D tests, because those types of numbers in projecting and discussing with the lab you're working with are going to help the lab be able to kind of fit and project you into, the flow, the sample flow and the turnaround flow. Because I think for a lot of people, in Oregon, what really smashed a lot of people was the fact that for certain labs, they were at like 6 to 8 week turnaround time, so people couldn't get product in the market. So it kind of really collapsed a lot of farms internally as a result. And so we've been working for this moment for a long time, and it's not going to be that kind of an issue for us. But just in develop, it's for your own ability to get product in the market and deal with kind of these things. It's like developing a really close relationship with the lab and being very communicative with what your needs are is going to be really important, for it. So it's not a bottleneck for your business.
I'll try to be quick. This has been a supply side economy for a while. You grew it, someone sold it. It's going to move to a demand side sort of economy, when what they want is what you need to grow and what you need to produce. Because if we don't, the gap between what people have become accustomed to buying and what is available on the shelves puts price parity into a position where the black market has too large of an advantage over products that people have become accustomed to buying. So even though there is this large amount of supply, if every portion of my menu doesn't have something that someone has become accustomed to buying and is available July 2nd, then they are pushed to a black market that not only has a cheaper product, but also has the product that they become accustomed to. So this isn't just about how much have we produced, it's have we produced what people are wanting to demand, because we did go from 5,000 retailers down to 500. And that is totally decimated the ability for the regulated market to get their products to market, to get them to the end consumer. So yes, we need more retailers, and everyone should go to the municipality and say, we need more retailers, otherwise my regulated product that I've spent hundreds of thousands of dollars to get ready for, I need to have someplace sell it for me. But we also need to make sure that the pricing is okay in terms of you have a budget that you can meet your demands. We've been taking on investment capital. If we can't keep our budgets ready so that investment capital sees their return on investment, then you see this kind of pull away from investing in cannabis. And we need this investment because we don't have money buried in our backyards. We've all just been surviving. This isn't what they think. It's not a mattress full of cash. It's been tough for us as families to make this work, but we've all been kind of single, small families. So do realize that if we continue to put this upward pressure on pricing and we take all this non-compliant product and send it back to distributors to get relabeled, to get retested, to get redone, it just adds cost just to bring it back to market. And then the end consumer is the one taking on this added cost. And as that end consumer sees that added cost get further and further away from the black market's cost, that's when we get diversion back into the black market. So I'm trying to say that we need every portion of our menu to be filled. We need our shelves to be filled with products that everyone's become accustomed to. Otherwise, we're driving them outside of the regulated industry. So that's where I see some of our shortages. It's not in supply, it's in the diversity of supply so that everyone can have what they become accustomed to buying. So that's where we're at.
Sure.
Just chime in briefly on I think there are not enough inputs yet to factor out and model out this economic concern. I think the original question was, where do we see the prices going? In the aggregate, upward, yeah. There's far too many inputs that are not going to have the ability to be reflected on the XY axis to track that. Sorry. Long story short, in the aggregate, it will go up over time, provided that there is enforcement and that there is attractive product.
Real quick, one quick thing. We've seen, as a result of how much people are buying material that's dirty, couple of the biggest manufacturing groups that make cartridges that we work with are starting to pay and try to lock in sustainable long-term relationships with small farms and paying $600 to $800 a pound for trim because they've done such incredible kind of vetting and can't find it. So it's if you have it, that's a reality.
Say it loud, say it proud.
It's clean.
It's clean, dude. You're good.
They have for years.
Yeah, I just wanted to basically echo what everyone's saying. We've got to bring to market what people want. There's not going to be any shortages or any issues if we're actually making what people want, because they will come and buy it. So, yeah.
Okay. Yeah, go ahead.
Real quick, though, I just want to say, we started on supply, and it obviously morphed into price. The two are definitely fundamentally related. I think that our industry needs to stop and realize that pricing is a thing that you do intentionally. What the market can yield is only one strategy for pricing. And that's what can we get for it? Cool, that's what it costs. Start looking at other methods of pricing. With the skyrocketing costs of bringing goods to market, a cost of bringing good to market pricing strategy is a very important thing for you to be familiar with. And that's how we can build the cooperative supply chain partnerships that we need, is by being open about what the actual real cost of producing good, cleanest in the world California cannabis.
Yes. Okay. Last question. Going to go to each of you. Rapid fire, short answer. We've got a big date looming over us here, which just so happened to coincide with perfect timing for this event, I think, to give everybody a quick breather before we really, really start sprinting. how will your business change, or the business of your members and cohorts change on July 1st?
We have laser focus now. You know, pre January 1, everyone was, you'd look at some people's offerings, some branded product makers, and they got this like buffet of things to choose from. That is gone. So laser focus right now. I mean, so my company, we have Leisure Life, which manufactures popcorn, as well as California Rolls, which is infused pre-rolls, a few different, we've had to put the pre-rolls on pause just because we've really got to focus on scaling one product. We got to do one thing, and we got to do it extremely well. And that's just how it is, Yeah, laser focus on one thing, do one thing, and fucking kill it.
Who wants to go next? How will your business change July 1? From now until day 1, July 1, how's the business going to change?
Well, sometimes when you're a part of an organization, you understand the rules, the laws, and the things that are coming. So it's the people who kind of been operating like an island for a long time, that they maybe have just been narrowly focused on what their business is, what those regulations are, and they may not have heard what some of the rules that are coming to play how they're going to affect them. So when I look at my group, we have about 62 retailers inside of our trade organization just in Los Angeles. Well, we've informed all of my 62 members. Well, there's also another 90 dispensaries in Los Angeles that have no idea what's going on. And so now they're coming and saying, wait, how are you going to take care of July 1st? And it's like, well, I've made relationships with distributors. I've made relationships with vendors. We've done this over the last few years to make sure that the supply chain wasn't going to be interrupted. But we're an anomaly. Most retailers are their own little islands and have been most of their lives, so they don't know this is looming. And so then now that it's real, July 1st is a real problem for them, because they don't have relationships. They're used to someone coming to their doorstep and handing them a turkey bag and saying, do you want this or not? It's not that way anymore. You have to find the distributor. You have to find the product. You need to know that they're there. And distributors had a really tough time, January through today, because we, as retailers, were told to backstock so we could displace a lot of the taxes so we could keep our prices low. So a lot of us did that. But now we're at this place now where like, okay, all of that's gone. And most of the people who aren't a part of an organization, who don't communicate well with each other, who only communicate internally, are not ready for this. And it's those people who I fear for, because that is probably 70% of the retail market who is not ready, just because they put their head in the sand and they just waited for things to happen. Because that's what they've done always. They just waited for stuff to happen to them. And now it's going to be a hardship. And so they're the ones who I think are going to really hamper the supply chain, because they don't know where to turn next. And they're still going to wait for someone to come to their door with a turkey bag and say, this is what you can sell. So we're going to have to, as cultivators, make sure that they know I have compliant product. You're going to have to go out there and be your salesman again, and it's not the same sales pitch. There is a list of all of the retail shops that are licensed in California. They have an address, they have a phone number. It's going to be groups of people, organizations that come and say, I would like to supply my product in your retail location. So they're the ones who are going to have the biggest supply chain problem, and I think we need to help them as suppliers.
I'm not a business owner. I represent about 1,300 businesses. About 800 of them are growers, and for the most part, they're stoked. There might actually be a market for clean, tested cannabis in California for the first time in forever. That's pretty cool. Those of you that have been growing clean, sustainable cannabis for years, bearing those costs before the market was ready to value what you were putting into it, I think are the most excited. That's what our folks are feeling. Certainly, as you get through the supply chain, it gets a bit dicier, but big up to California growers for working so hard over the last few years to get 1,700 licensees and 3,900 licenses in the first 6 months of the year. Did a good job, you guys. Let's keep doing it.
Excellent. Chris, Alec, quickly, how's your business going to change July 1st?
Not very much. We've been planning on this for the last 6 months. So
Been out ahead of it.
actually, we're now focused on January 1st.
There you go.
on both these points, I think forward planning, again, communication, kind of a group like Pacific Expeditors, that, has kind of been essentially kind of doing compliance testing over the last few months, stockpiling kind of grams or, compliant tested product and ready for this moment, I think are not going to have as much of a bottleneck, when it comes to testing. If the first compliance event that you've ever done is like on or after July, whenever all the labs are pretty like busy already, it's a whole like installation, it's like if you haven't become familiarized with the process of regulatory compliance testing and what it takes, all done through licensed distribution in the lab. Lab sends out like sampling van with field technicians that put on Tyvek suits. The batches are pre-laid out. We're essentially recording the information of distribution license number, the manufacturer producer license number. We're then verifying the batch, we're doing a random statistically valid sampling of a representative sample of the batch, 0.35%, up to essentially 80 grams off of a 50-pound batch we're randomly selecting. And then with kind of infused products, it's like up to 150,000 individual units. And so we're essentially taking certain increments. Those are what we're going back to do compliance testing. And, compliance testing it's such high stakes because, if you haven't done it before, for one, there's like, the first time's kind of like awkward, because it's like, the place isn't really set up. You don't really, know what's to happen. And so, it's like, it takes some like, working with your lab, like we or another lab are going to kind of handhold and help you in a bit of a way to kind of make sure your room's set up right, kind of all the stuff. And then, it's about 15 to 30 minutes per sample or per sampling of a batch, for unpackaged flower. 90% of all compliance fails that we've had to report to the BCC this year specifically aren't even around anything other than label claim. If you make a label claim, don't make any label claims getting product R&D tested, ready for market for when you go to compliance. It has to be in its final package form with all its kind of compliant labeling and all that stuff. But do not put anything about THC, CBD, THCA, terpenes, anything like that. If you do that, testing's done at the compliance level, and then you can put a sticker on, and then it's ready to go. But whenever you make claims on active cannabinoid content, we have to basically make a label claim verification on each one of those values. It has to be within 10%. And so it's like, oftentimes if you're at 24% THC or something, you can hit within 10%. But if you, which is plus or minus 2.5% either way. But it's like if you're making a label claim on a low value, like 0.1, 0.3% CBD or THCA, the difference between 0.3 and 0.4, which is nothing, is 100% difference. So it's like, don't make any label claims, especially on low values, because then it's just going to create like a accordion of kind of backup, and then you have to go through the label, all that stuff. But I guess my point is, testing labs are going to be a little bit flexed, but it's really important to kind of reach out, and kind of get educated in the process, familiarize yourself with the regulations, and just set up for success, because it's definitely a high stakes game that's happening from now on.
Thank you, each one of you. What an amazing panel to start off with. We have Jared Kylo, owner of The Higher Path, president of the United Cannabis Business Association in Los Angeles. Alec Dixon, co-founder, director of client relations from SE Labs. Chris Cullum, president, CEO of Pacific Expeditors Distributors. We have Amber Center, CEO, founder, co-founder of Leisure Life and California Rolls. Hezekiah Allen, executive director of the California Growers Association, president Emerald Grown. Thank you all. We have our next panel coming right up.